Hello, my name is Professor Todd Richard Yarbrough. I'm a clinical assistant professor at Pace University in New York City, and myself, along with my co-author, Matthew Murray from the University of Tennessee, will present in our paper today, Rainy Day Funds in the Fiscal Mix, Evidence from U.S. States. So what is a rainy day fund? Well, a rainy day fund is a part of a broad class of what we refer to as fiscal institutions, balanced budget rules, tax and expenditure limits, debt limits. And the main purpose of fiscal institutions is to induce fiscal discipline over time and to do so in a non-political way. So these rules exist so that over time, as states are formulating budgets, both the state legislature as well as the governor, they are constrained by these rules and as a result will develop more fiscally responsible budgets. Rainy day funds, also sometimes referred to as budget stabilization funds, work in a very straightforward manner. The idea is that during good economic time periods when revenues are robust, the states will take some of their surplus or all of their surplus revenue, they'll deposit it into the rainy day fund. And then when there is a cyclical downturn and the states experience a reduction in revenue and perhaps an increase in spending, they're able to pull money out of their rainy day fund. And what this does is it smooths expenditure over the business cycle. The reason why this is important is because cyclical changes to governmental expenditure, be it for education or infrastructure, capital projects, can be very problematic, and states want to avoid cyclical disturbances, and one way to do that is with rainy day funds. Rainy day funds alter the incentives of budgetary decision-making in three key ways. One, they seem to increase the incentive to save. Two, they, as I mentioned, decrease those cyclical budgetary year-to-year fluctuations. And then three, they could also be competing with other expenditure categories. And the question becomes, is the incentive for a policymaker to put money into the rainy day fund strictly about saving money for a future rainy day, so to speak, or has the need for rainy day funds as a way to show fiscal discipline begun crowding out other expenditure categories? In our paper, we use a sample of the lower 48 contiguous US states from 1970 to 2015. We find that states with high rainy day fund balances see higher shares of infrastructure and capital outlays, while they see lower shares of education, healthcare, and social assistance. And then later on in the presentation, I'll also be detailing for you some interesting interactions that we looked at to really hone in on the rainy day fund effect. Previous literature finds that first and foremost, rainy day funds were adopted en masse as a way to reduce the fiscal stress that most states, nearly all states, were experiencing in the 1970s and 1980s. So it's really around the 1980s and on into the 1990s where you see states adopting rainy day funds to a large extent. In practice, rainy day funds seem to induce savings. So once a rainy day fund has been instituted, we do see, the literature finds that there are increases in savings as high as 1-for-1 in the Knight and Levinson 1999 paper, and then a little bit closer to around 50 cents on the dollar from the Hugh and Duncombe paper in 2008. Finally, in a seminal paper in 2010, Rose suggests that only rainy day funds, along with balanced budget rules, are the effective fiscal institutions. Tax and expenditure limits, debt limits, these don't seem to matter much at all. And really the main effective institutions are rainy day funds and balanced budget rules. So rainy day funds are themselves very important because they've proven themselves to be useful. This is total rainy day fund balances amongst all states since 1970. You'll see that there's been a steady incline in the total amount of rainy day fund balances that states are accumulating. This is the average balances among state. You'll notice that average balances have also been slowly accumulating. The main difference, I think, between this and this is, of course, that generally speaking, there is not a significant change in the amount that each state on average is saving in the rainy day funds. It's just that more states are saving them. And so more states have more rainy day funds. So that's why we see this curve go up. The average amount is staying roughly the same. This is interesting because it suggests that even amongst the largely heterogeneous states, that rainy day funds are treated very similar from a state to state basis. Here's the spending behavior amongst US states over this time period as well. You'll notice the most striking aspect of this figure is the dramatic increase in social assistance spending, mostly due to the mid-1990s Medicare, Medicaid expansion and welfare reform that occurred during the Clinton administration, which moved a lot of the fiscal responsibility onto states. You'll see that over that same time period, the share of the budget devoted to education is declining. The share of the budget dedicated to infrastructure is declining, and the share of the budget dedicated to capital projects is also declining, with only a marginal and sort of negligible effect on healthcare. So these are the trends over time that we're experiencing. And this is important for us to understand as we detail or uncover rainy day fund effects. These are our summary statistics for the model that we ultimately use. And these are the summary statistics for the shares. So you'll see that on average, education is about 21.5% of the total general fund budget. That gets as high as around 40% and as low as about 8%. So you see there's a pretty wide variation across states. And you'll see that's true for a lot of the other states as well. In some states, social assistance spending is greater than 50%, whereas in other states it's less than 6%. So there's a considerable heterogeneity that exists amongst states already with respect to their fiscal mix. And so this enables us to also econometrically test to see if rainy day funds are at least somewhat at play in these particular effects. So our empirical strategy rests upon a first measured traditional fixed effect OLS model, which then we quickly moved to a fractional response Logit because there are problems with using fixed effects models when the left-hand side variable is a proportion. So we run the fixed effects panel OLS models, we get some interesting and significant results, but because of the problem associated with using fixed effects in the presence of a left-hand side variable, which is a proportion, we move very quickly to the fractional response Logit. Here are our baseline models. The main variables of interest are rainy day fund increase and rainy day fund decrease. So these are actual dollar amounts associated with when states put money into their rainy day fund and when states take money out of their rainy day fund. So these are not indicators. These are actual amount of money when a state puts money into the rainy day fund and when the state takes money out of their rainy day fund. And then in a secondary model with some interactions, we create a indicator variable, which is one, if the state has at least 5% of their total general fund expenditure in a rainy day fund, and then we interact that indicator with our two rainy day fund use variables. The point here is that we want to see is the behavior amongst high balance states distinct from the behavior amongst general rainy day fund behavior. And then there's a vector of control variable Z. This vector includes percent of the population that's above 65, percent of the population that's below 18, state personal income, as well as population. And the model also includes year dummies. So this is the fractional response Logit outcomes. You'll notice that we get statistically significant effects on education, infrastructure, and social assistance when states put money into their rainy day fund, and no statistically significant results when states take money out of their fund. So this is already suggesting that when states put money into their rainy day funds, we're seeing the shares of these different budgetary categories altered. Education is lower, infrastructure is lower, and social assistance is higher. In the second model, where we include the high indicator, we'll notice that amongst high balance states, education expenditure is even lower than it was before. Healthcare expenditure is lower. Interestingly enough, infrastructure spending is higher. You'll remember that in this model, we found this negative result. So while rainy day funds generally may have a negative effect on infrastructure spending share, that amongst high balance states, that share is considerably higher. Social assistance, again, has a different sign. It seems to be negatively affected by high rainy day fund balances, and capital outlay seems to be positive. So the overall effect amongst high balance states is that education is lower, healthcare is lower, and social assistance is lower, while the shares of infrastructure and capital outlays are higher. Once again, we can see that amongst high balance states, when money is placed into it, education falls even more, healthcare falls even more, and social assistance falls even more. So we're getting a pretty clear story here that amongst high balance states and when money is placed into a rainy day fund, that we see lower shares of education, healthcare, and social assistance. And then amongst high balance states, we're seeing higher shares of infrastructure and capital outlays. Because we want to further estimate these effects and interpret their coefficients directly, we use a fractional response multinomial Logit and then use an average partial effects technique to back out percentage changes. So when we do that, we get these are the percentage changes. So we can see that just generally amongst high balance states, education is about 1.1% lower compared with non-high balance states. Healthcare is about 1.3% lower. Infrastructure, 1.4% higher. Social assistance, about 2% lower. And then capital outlays, about 3% higher. And again, we see similar results for both education as well as social assistance, that they are further pushed down. So when a high balance state puts money into the rainy day fund, we see education fall by about 2.2% total. And we see social assistance fall by more than 3%, about 3.1% in total. So what are we finding? We're finding that first and foremost, among states that have high rainy day fund balances, their shares of education, healthcare, and social assistance are lower. And when those states put money into the rainy day fund, we see that those shares are falling even further. Interestingly enough, amongst those same high balance states, we're seeing higher shares of infrastructure and capital outlays. So what does this mean? What it possibly means is that because infrastructure and capital outlays are more long-term expenditure categories, oftentimes paying for projects which are going to take a long time to pay for anyway, that among high balance states, they're able to maintain capital and capital outlays and infrastructure projects over the business cycle. Whereas when a high balance state puts money into the rainy day fund, they seem to be crowding out education, healthcare, and social assistance spending. So in essence, what we believe we found evidence of is that amongst high balance states, in order to keep capital outlays and infrastructure shares at their same level, that we're seeing crowding out amongst education, healthcare, and social assistance. Which again, the point of rainy day funds isn't to reduce any other expenditure category, it's simply to induce fiscal discipline over the business cycle. It would seem, at least by our results, that states are reducing the cyclical variance of year-to-year expenditure by specifically reducing the shares of education, healthcare, as well as social assistance. So in the future, what we really need to be paying attention to, first and foremost, is running additional models to make sure that we're getting an actual causal effect, perhaps moving into an instrumental variables approach to really get at whether the effects that we're estimating here are true effects or whether they're spurious. In addition, there has been rapid development amongst US states of the ways in which they're using their rainy day funds. So it would be nice to include into a model the different types of rainy day funds, because some states have rainy day funds with rules regarding how much money they are supposed to put into the funds relative to state surpluses. So it would be really important for us to see if states with rainy day fund rules have distinct behavior from those states that have virtually the rainy day fund deposit and withdrawal is completely discretionary. But this is a really important topic because, again, states are increasingly relying upon rainy day funds in order to smooth over those fiscal variances. And so the fact that in order to do so, it seems like states are crowding out education, healthcare, and social assistance spending is at least concerning.